Henry VIII's sister Mary did not get along with Anne Boleyn, and their feud erupted into bloodshed in 1532. In an instant, a courtier lay dead, and it was all Mary's fault. The House of Tudor had more than its fair share of scandalous figures, from Henry VIII's many marriages to the intrigue and plots of the court of Elizabeth I, but few remember the twisted tale of Mary Tudor, the English princess who briefly became Queen of France. Mary was born in an auspicious time for the House of Tudor. When her father Henry VII wed her mother Elizabeth of York, the marriage finally brought together the bitter factions of the Wars of the Roses. Mary's parents had many children over the years, but she was one of only 4 to survive infancy, and as the baby of the small, precarious family, Mary's father spoiled her. Even though King Henry was in huge financial trouble after years of constant battle, he showered Mary with gifts, to an almost extreme extent. When she was just 6 years old, Henry gave his little princess her own household, including a staff that comprised a number of gentlewomen, a teacher, and a doctor. Yet even as Henry VII was doing everything to give Mary a glorious childhood, heartbreak was lurking just around the corner. In 1502, Mary's small royal family got even smaller. Arthur, Prince of Wales, was the golden boy of the Tudor brood, especially after he married Princess Catherine of Aragon. Then, suddenly and mysteriously, he took ill and died in 1502 when Mary was still a little girl. The family was grief-stricken, but the grief didn't stop there. That year, her mother Elizabeth was pregnant again and gave birth to a baby girl. Her joy turned to pain almost immediately. The child didn't survive, and Elizabeth soon contracted a brutal and fatal infection. The spate of losses left Mary heartbroken, but her father's reaction was truly disturbing. Henry VII was so devastated, he retreated into himself and became incredibly sick. Suddenly, Mary not only had to deal with her mother's death, she was also totally isolated from the only parent she had left. The heartbreak that followed losing her brother and mother in quick succession had a devastating effect on Mary. She became a mirror of her father's pain, and in the 5 years following the tragedies, her health deteriorated tremendously, and she began to complain of a range of symptoms from stomach pains to headaches. At this time, the Tudors were powerful, but they were about to get notorious. That's because one of Mary's siblings was her older brother, Henry, aka the future King Henry VIII. The pair were just 4 years apart in age and were incredibly close. Instead of trying to remarry himself, Henry VII set his eyes on Mary and Henry. After Arthur died, Catherine of Aragon had become a widow, and the king saw no problem sticking her with his younger son Henry instead. As for Mary, she was still just a young girl, but her father had something even creepier in store. In 1506, Henry VII made a deal with Philip I of Castile, betrothing Mary to the Castilian heir, Charles. Henry VII died of tuberculosis in April 1509, when Mary was only 13. Now she had no one but her brother Henry to rely on. In 1509, the newly minted King Henry VIII took the English throne. But if Mary thought her brother's coronation would bring stability to her life, she was very wrong. In 1513, Henry called his sister's engagement off and betrothed her to a more advantageous suitor, King Louis XII of France. England and France were in conflict with each other, and Henry thought his sister would sweeten a peace deal. Louis XII was more than a little battle-hardened and quite a bit older than Mary. While she was a blooming 18 years old, he was 52. To make matters worse, he'd already gone through 2 queens and still didn't have the male heir all European kings desperately craved. Once he set his eyes on the legendarily beautiful and charming Mary in the flesh, the king apparently lauded her as a nymph from heaven. Following the loss of her mother, Mary became very close with her governess, Joan Vaux, even referring to the woman fondly as Mother Guildford. Vaux was an incredible comfort throughout Mary's teen years, but that doesn't mean her presence was always beneficial to the Tudors. On October 9th, 1514, the teenage Mary got married to her ageing husband, tying the knot in a royal ceremony as Queen of France No. 3. On the big day, she had Mother Guildford by her side, and no fewer than 4 maids of honour. Despite these luxuries, Mary was miserable, so she came up with a daring scheme. Just before her wedding, Mary had written a desperate letter to Henry VIII. In it, she forced him to make a promise to her. She'd stick with her decrepit husband for now, but when he kicked the bucket, she'd be able to marry whomever she wanted. Henry agreed, but it was a pact that he'd come to regret almost immediately. Everyone who knew Mary said that in addition to her great beauty, she was also very lively. She loved participating in masques and dancing, and she even tried to make the best of it with her new husband. Reportedly, when she first met Louis, the pert girl greeted him by blowing him a kiss. What a livewire. When Mary travelled to France, she got a rude awakening. Joan Vaux was her comfort blanket on the way, but when they arrived, it became clear that Louis detested the woman. He complained that Joan never left them alone for a second. In a flex of absolute power, Louis sent Joan packing back to England. Then, not content with merely throwing out his wife's surrogate mother, he also banished most of Mary's English staff. Understandably, Mary was both heartbroken and furious. Yet little did she know, another sharp twist of fate was around the corner. In the end, Mary's marriage was as short as it was rubbish. A mere 3 months after their union, King Louis XII was dead. Mary wasted no time taking back power for herself. While the fact that she hadn't produced an heir to the French throne left her powerless in that country, she still had an ace up her sleeve: the deal she'd made with her brother Henry. She'd been widowed, and she could now marry whomever she wanted, and she already had someone in mind. Before she ever became a reluctant queen, historians believe Mary already had her eye on the first Duke of Suffolk, Charles Brandon. Strapping and athletic, Brandon also just so happened to be one of her brother Henry's closest friends. Though Henry liked Brandon, he knew there were more powerful men out there for his sister, and wasn't about to let her get married to a mere duke. Instead, Henry set his eyes on the new King of France, Francis I. This was a controversial idea, considering that Francis was very much already married. While Francis eagerly awaited the death of his ailing wife so he could wed Mary, he also got busy on another task, putting the Tudor princess under surveillance. He had Mary watched like a hawk for months to make sure she wasn't pregnant, since any baby would be his rival for the throne. When it came time for Mary to return to England after her royal husband's funeral, Henry VIII made a fatal error. He sent hunky Charles Brandon to pick her up and accompany her home. When Brandon went to retrieve Mary from France, the rebel Tudor set her plan in motion. Despite the promise he'd made to her brother, she quickly convinced Charles that they were meant to be together. According to Brandon's letters, her methods of persuasion involved a whole lot of weeping. The lovebirds got married in secret right before leaving France, exactly like they weren't supposed to. There were just 10 guests in attendance, including the newly crowned King Francis I, who apparently really wanted to make sure Mary was gone for good. As it turns out, Charles Brandon wasn't exactly the good guy Mary thought he was. He'd married twice before, and they hadn't had happy endings. His first marriage to Margaret Neville was quickly declared void, while his second wedding to Anne Brown, which produced 2 daughters, was yet another secret wedding. When the couple got back home and shared their happy news, Henry VIII was absolutely furious. He wasn't known for his serene demeanour and cool-headedness, but he also had a legal right to be teed off. Marrying a princess without permission from your king, that's treason. Mary's life and marriage hung in the balance. The punishment for treason was execution, and Henry had to seriously mull over his next actions. If he let the rebel lovers get away with it, he'd look like a sucker. But if he punished Charles, he'd lose his friend and break his sister's heart. In the end, Henry came up with an ingenious solution. He fined Mary and Charles an exorbitant sum and demanded that Mary give him her dowry and any expensive gifts that Louis XII had given her during their brief marriage. Once they had agreed to the terms of their punishment, Mary and Brandon had a second wedding ceremony at Greenwich Hall in London, with Henry VIII and the rest of the English court in attendance. Henry was so pleased with the union that he even reduced their fine. Perhaps he considered it a wedding gift. In the late 1520s, Henry was infamously getting tired of Catherine of Aragon, all while becoming very enamoured with Anne Boleyn. Mary was staunchly in the Team Catherine camp, and not just because the Queen was her longtime friend. As it happened, she also despised Anne Boleyn. Tensions were running high in Henry's court, and it all culminated in a brutal rampage. In 1532, one of Anne Boleyn's supporters killed a man from Mary and Brandon's entourage. At first, people wrote the unfortunate incident off as a private quarrel between the two men, but soon the dark truth came out. One man was lying cold in his grave, and the tragedy somehow led directly back to Mary Tudor. As the dust settled on the incident, people began to explain that the whole duel had started because Mary had uttered opprobrious language against Madame Boleyn. In 1533, Mary's worst nightmare came true. After years of trying to support her friend Catherine of Aragon's cause, Henry publicly married Anne Boleyn, and Mary had lost the game. She lost more than that, though. The struggle had taken its toll, and her health problems began to worsen. Following Anne's coronation, Mary tried to mend fences with her brother. Hopeful for a reconciliation, she wrote him a letter. In it, she told him frankly that she missed him and wanted to see him again. Perhaps she knew the end was near. Back in 1515, Mary and Charles Brandon started growing their family, and when Mary gave birth to a boy, she even named him Henry, after her beloved brother. In the coming years, her household expanded steadily, with daughters Frances and Eleanor arriving soon after. By this time in her life, Mary Tudor knew tragedy intimately, but nothing could prepare her for what happened in 1522. Her firstborn son and heir, Lord Henry Brandon, died when he was just 6 years old. Once again, the devastation and shock had horrifying effects on Mary's health, which she needed now more than ever. When Catherine of Aragon gave birth to a healthy baby girl in 1516, she honoured Mary by naming the girl after her. Granted, after a few dark turns, the child came to be known as Bloody Mary. Can't win 'em all. In 1528, Mary caught a sweating sickness that she never quite recovered from, which only complicated her already dubious medical history. She suffered from recurring fevers, a pain in her side, and any number of shivering spells throughout her life. But by 1533, her illness had reached a crisis. On June 25th, Mary Tudor died, and the causes are still mysterious. Henry VIII arranged for a lavish funeral befitting Mary's stature. Her children were there to mourn her, and her stepdaughters were so distraught that they pushed to the front to watch as attendants lowered her remains into the crypt. Mary was just 37 when she died, which was relatively young even in the Tudor period. Yet given her chronic ill health, historians have had difficulty understanding exactly what killed her. Experts have suggested ailments ranging from angina, tuberculosis, appendicitis, or even cancer. Regardless, it was a tragic loss for the House of Tudor, but Mary's story doesn't end there. Centuries after her swift, tragic end, a motley group of English noblemen and women dug up her remains and pried open her coffin in a truly strange episode. They took locks of her hair, an early example of the Tudor mania which has persisted in the centuries since this bizarre incident. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.